Rod, thank you very much. It's a very nice introduction. I'd like to say thank you to everyone for coming out. I'm very happy to be here in Ottawa, to have been invited to read this series. I've known about this series for a long time, and it's a pleasure to find myself part of it. I like to read my work, but I also really like to read work by other people. It's a lot less anxiety-inducing, and I usually stick somebody else's poem somewhere in a reading when I give one, and I'm going to open with a poem by someone else tonight. Alice Oswald is a contemporary British poet. She wrote a wonderful book called Dark, which actually, in which she takes you with the poem, the length of the River Dart, and engages with people who work the river, who've lived along it, with the history of it, and with the physicality of it. It's a wonderful book. This poem, it's a single long poem, so it's hard to excerpt. I'm going to read instead a poem of hers from her second collection called Woods, Etc., from Faber, and this poem is called Hymn to Iris. Iris is the rainbow goddess. Quick-moving goddess of the rainbow, you whose being is only an afterglow of a passing through, put your heaven-taken shape down on the ground, now, anywhere. Like a bent-down bough of nothing, a bridge built out of the linked cells of thin air. And let there be instantly, in its underlight, at street corners, on swings, out of car windows, a 3-moment blessing for all bridges. May impossible rifts be often delicately crossed by bridges of 2 throwing ropes or 1 dropped plank. May the unfixed forms of water be warily leaned over on flexible high bridges, huge iron sketches of the mathematics of strain, and bridges of see-through stone, the living space of drips and echoes. May 2 fields be bridged by a stile, and 2 hearts by the lilting footbridge of a glance. And may I often wake on the broken bridge of a word, like in the wind, the trace of a web, tethered to nothing. She's a wonderful poet. Her books are published by Faber. You should be able to find them in your library. Read them. How is the sound doing? Is it okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Rob, you will make faces if I need to do something?
Oh, I'll wave my arms.
Okay, thanks.
And say something.
I've never lived in Ottawa, but I've had occasion to go back and forth quite a bit. My last job as a librarian, I was called the coordinator of cataloging and publication, and I actually reported to the National Library, although I worked out of the University of Toronto, and I came quite often on for meetings and for discussions with people housed in Hull, unfortunately not on Wellington Street. And I occasionally got to stay over. And so I'm going to open my poems with a poem that came from one of those trips when I got to stay in a hotel that overlooked the Ottawa River. So this is called, and I'm naming, the Ottawa. From this high hotel window, I watch the river, broad and stippled, dull silver under clouds and evening. Trees reclaim the landscape, pushing over buildings, bruising windows and bursting concrete in dreamy silence, while small cries of unknown birds pierce the air. It's morning, and I'm stiff from sleeping on the ground. The only direction I know is where the sun rose, spearing me awake, and I can name nothing here but flat shapes against the sky. Blossom, leaf, bird, branch, river. That's from A Possible Landscape. I'm going to read about 4 poems from the Drowned Boy sequence that Rod mentioned. And this sequence of poems was a kind of gift to me. I go to Saskatchewan quite a lot. I grew up on the prairies, although not in Saskatchewan, but I go to Saskatchewan Writers Guild sponsored writing colonies at St. Peter's Abbey in a little town called Munster, which is about an hour and a half east of Saskatoon. It's a wonderful place to write. The first time I went there, I went with the manuscript of what became Drowning Lessons to a colloquium where I was working with Tim Lilburn trying to finish the manuscript. That was, I won't mention, about 7 years before I did actually finish it. But Tim, there were 5 of us working with Tim. Each of us brought a manuscript, and the notion was that we would develop it and finish it and fine-tune it while we were there. But Tim issued a kind of challenge. He said, given that we had 3 weeks, why didn't we all, as a matter of what he called discipline, write a new poem every second day, or do a major revision? And when Tim says a major revision, he means tear it apart. Take it completely apart and start over and see what you can do. This was like being given permission to play. Suddenly there wasn't this serious heavy work to do on this manuscript, which was resistant, but you could do whatever you wanted, at least part of the time. It was wonderful. And one day I was out walking, and suddenly this image of a drowned boy kind of drifted through the air to me. It was October. It was very sunny. It was very golden because the fields were ripe, or had been cut, a lot of them, and were still beige colored. And the elms, they still have lots of elms in Saskatchewan. The elms go this extraordinary yellow. So the whole world was kind of full of light, and here was this figure who swam through it to me. I knew it was a drowned boy. I knew he was a drowned boy, and I didn't know anything more about him. And I didn't like him. This was not a comforting image, and I didn't want to deal with it, but he haunted me. And finally I sat down and wrote a poem, and I took it to Tim, and Tim thought the poem was working, and so I started to write other poems. And it took me another 4 or 5 years to do the whole sequence, but this figure remained at the center of them. So this is the first poem that I got, and it's called simply The Drowned Boy. Somewhere a boy is drowning, or has drowned, but he doesn't know it. He believes he is still holding his mother's hand, still stepping carefully along the dock's edge, astonished by the sunset sky. His face is lifted to the heavy light, the way it trembles and darts through the gentle water. Does his mother dream she flung him from her in an agony because a bee plunges and stings her? Its venom whirls below her skin, voices keening at the membrane behind her ear, the thin-bladed whine more than she can bear. It all happened so fast. That's why he hasn't noticed that his eyes blink slowly against water, not light. Ribbon weeds caress him soft as a mother's hand, and he yawns and drifts slightly. It's that dreamy time of evening when some people leave their bodies seated in padded green armchairs while they spiral like augurs through the dusk. They believe they may glimpse the faces they had before they were born, or at least the faces of the mothers they never knew. As for the drowned or drowning boy, a length of something, weed, rope, plastic pipe, has caught him under one arm. Perhaps it is this line he mistakes for his mother's hand. Sometimes on a standstill night when the moon is brightening, if you look closely, you'll catch sight of him, turning and shifting in the water. You might see his eyes refract the light and pass it back to yours, a blessing passing between. The drowned boy goes for a walk. The drowned boy has come out of the water, out for a stroll with his hair eddying around him. He feels at home in the dull rain. He tastes the watery air and smiles. cloud, field. All the dull bronzed world has gone soft, its edges blurred. Sounds travel a long distance under the wet sky and bump up against his brooding. He is not bothered by them. He does not really listen. Tractor, magpie, the rattling corn. This hum trailing past him, carried off in his wake. He doesn't bother to look either, drifting along the grassy paths, all that washed hair flung out for the rain to rinse. Fields spin through his floating thoughts, clouds of dragonflies spiraling in the dusk. The wind's current parting the grass makes a dance step, seize his ankles, so he pirouettes, tossing his head, shaking out his colored thoughts as a ruffed grouse whipples and expands at the edge of the woods. The drowned boy finds a boat on the lake bottom. Tripped on his morning amble toward a shore, he catches himself, drifts upright and stares at peeling boards and rusted oarlock, his pliable fingers meeting the punky wood protruding from the lake's bottom, half bandaged with roots and weeds, critters running their lives within it, held fast. The boy remembers how the wind shakes the lake's surface as a boat drifts and hours trail toward evening. Does he see a man walking along a dock, tackle box and pole in one hand? The man's heart is a knot, pulled tight, so tight it stops at the lake's edge and gives in, held fast. Waterlogged, the drowned boy twists and turns away, his own heart nodding. Something is flying behind him, its shadow rippling along the lake's surface. That wind hunting him, osprey eyes glinting. He can't catch his breath, held fast. The drowned boy half wakes, remembering another life. He can almost hear it. Not his mother's voice calling, but a kind of clear, hard music drifting through bright rooms, tall pillars, low-treed hills behind him. A place of angels dancing, their feet brisk as hummingbirds. His feet are uncertain on the high and difficult steps. He doesn't know where they lead, the room he was meant to go to. The sky has lowered over the lake and snow is threatening. If only he could remember. A sound of bells at the end of the hall, and then he was there once when voices sang the evening forward, people leaning in their chairs to listen as the gentle hills moved closer. His body was left behind. He had no hands and didn't need them. His shoes were soft red leather and made no sound as he danced. I had a plan for this reading, but I'm going to change it slightly. I'm going to... yes?
I'd like to applaud.
Thank you very much. Now I forget my plan, my second plan. Anyway, I want to find the poem that you mentioned. What was the one you mentioned, the prose
I
poem?
Can Dance Country?
Yes, thank you.
Well, that's great.
If I can remember, yes. Actually, it's a pleasure. This poem grew out of a drive along the a drive from Toronto to Winnipeg, actually, but specifically about driving the North Shore of Lake Superior, and I've had the pleasure of doing that again this year. My cousins in Sioux Lookout celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, and we went to have the party, to be part of the party, and came back along the North Shore by car. So the country's in my head, again. I dance country. It's raining across the whole country, I bet, slicking these heat shield rocks red under a white sky lowering in, and past the windshield wipers slur the road's edge, flung with wildflowers, gleams like somebody's just spatter-painted it red, yellow, and white. In Manitoba, the wheat's still green, and if you look, you'll see the wind punching up clouds upon clouds over yellow-green waves as rain blows in, streaking the window. Drive, I said. I got him and the rain on my mind, like in any good country song, imagining we're dancing, pulled into the tavern with the jukebox, or maybe it's Friday night, a three-piece Western band. It's so real I can feel his arm across my back, stronger than I remembered it, and dancing like this is all I ever want to do. Nothing so perfect 30 years down the road as country music and his arms, this riddling mix of memory and desire swinging me home. The highway rises to meet wet cloud along the North Shore. It's late afternoon, and the road swoops like any crow in and out of fog, the land looming up shadowy and blurred, and any story might be happening out there past the rocks and pines, the swamp where moose browse like no one's ever stopped, but only hightailed past through the rain to the next jukebox and hot cup of coffee, and these wheels turning keep the dream alive. I'm still dancing. It's getting dark now as we drive and the rain still falls. The road reeks of emptiness. The land is only shadow. It's hard to see anything but the road's sleek skin and rock and trees edging in. There's no tavern round this curve and no jukebox, but the radio's on to hurtin' songs, and I want to look up and see myself glowing in the blurry windshield, looking more beautiful than he ever remembered me. His glance holding me here as we dance, buoyed by the rain and the dark and the road, this country music leading us on. How much of time, Rod? I forgot to write it down. Okay. I'm going to read some poems that are not in the books. I hope they will be in my third book, which is slowly taking form. I'm a slow writer. Walking in Saskatchewan with Rilke. All summer I've been walking with Rilke, the two of us kicking up the dust. Reiner, I'd say, look at that. My finger straight out, pointing at the sky, burgeoning over the flowing field, or the spruce trees swimming beyond the dugout. Mostly he didn't answer, except for a slow nod, his own glance sweeping along the arcing grasses, those dusty ones which sway and dance at the verge's graveled edge, his mind caught in the brooding chamber. Our walking's been companionable, and he's a patient man, perhaps, silent in spite of my garrulousness. And as for me, I guess I wasn't waiting for any particular answer. No marks given for poetic sensibility, and certainly no rose handed to me or letter inked on scented paper. Only some days, the way things surge into being here, claim eyes, claim mind, claim my very heart beating and beating, bird in the breast, this longing for sound. His silence, pulsing, makes me want to throw back my head and yap like any old dog, yellow fur rough with dust, skin flaking, and a flea in my ear driving me crazy, so I'll run for miles, nose down on prairie scents, heart wild with sky and wind. That's not a new poem. That poem comes from a while ago, and I'm going to read you some newer poems now. This is a little one called Keeping You in Mind. I carry you with me, so I say, held in the depths of thought or imagination, keeping you in mind. That way, so I say, we'll never really be apart. The veiled figures with their backs to me shake their heads. They converse with the sea, watch the blowing grass, and whose mind is this, I ask, where am I? Where was I going when I began this thought? Keeping you at hand, but you've gone beneath the sea, the ceaseless sea. The veils and the grass keep blowing. I was asked to contribute some poems to an anthology of environmental and ecological poetry that a man called David Klink is putting together in Toronto. And I blindly said fine, and it was about 2 months before he wanted it. And then I discovered he didn't want anything that was already published. And I was faced with the challenge of having to write more quickly than I normally do or like to. So this is one of the poems that came from that. It's called The Dodo's Afterlife, and it has 2 epigraphs. The first is from a book written in 1848, and the second is from a book written in 2002. The first is, "Our consolation must be found in the reflection that man is destined by his Creator to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it." That's from H.E. Strickland, The Dodo and Its Kindred. "Perhaps the loss of this creature affronts people at a very deep level, and there is a genuine psychological need to somehow reinvent the living bird. People want to touch the dodo, and it is, of course, impossible to touch a shadow. The dodo was extinct in the 18th century. It became kind of the symbol of when people started to realize what was happening of the human impress on the natural world. 1. It was extinct, actually, because it was extinct so early, we know very little about it. The specimens that exist, there are none, actually. There's fragments of specimens. There was one in Oxford, which is the one that Lewis Carroll had seen and that was the basis for the dodo in Alice in Wonderland. But its taxidermy wasn't so good in the 18th and early 19th century, and it started to go rotten and was burned, although one of the museum keepers managed to rescue a couple of fragments, and they still have those. But that was kind of the fate of those few specimens that were brought back to Europe in one way or another. So 1, what we know, almost nothing. You did exist, though that too was doubted. You vanished so fast you fell back into the imaginary, were deemed fable or lie, until bones turned up and Alice's chronicler put you into her story. What remains and where? And this is a found poem. A dried head, a skeleton of a foot and a few pieces of skin, Oxford. A foot, maybe, London. A skull, Copenhagen. A beak and the skeleton of a leg, Prague. Several composite fossil skeletons and boxes of loose fossils in museums around the world. A series of vague and contradictory written eyewitness descriptions. 2. Empty of humans, your island was paradise on the 5th day. On the 6th, we arrived with our appetites and convictions, our cats, rats, monkeys, and pigs, predators all, emptying your nests. You looked like nothing we knew when we came ashore hunting for fresh food and water. Outlandish, witless, wingless, you sat while we beat you to death, yielding flesh that toughened when boiled, a loathsome taste. 3. Poor dumb cluck. Alive, you were good for a laugh with your overgrown chick's body and featherless head protruding from a hoodie, that huge beak and an indifferent plume where your tail should have been. Your legs scaly and thick, no substitute for stubs of wings too small for such bulk. We hardly noticed your numbers thin, then fade to rumor, old wives' tale. In less than a century, no one remembered seeing you. Totterston, wallow bird, nauseating fowl, devil's chicken, dronte, plump arse, sluggard, dodo. 4. Has an epigraph from Lewis Carroll. At last the dodo said, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." The shadows multiply and the ligaments of the world loosen as we dig for your bones, comb records, and troll museum vaults for sightings. You're the poster bird for extinction, and we want more of you. Arguing over your descent, what we wouldn't give now to be greeted by your naivete. Alice's prize was her own thimble, yours to be a shade still put to use, ours to be subdued by our ignorance. From fragments and our ideas of you, hoping for signs and wonders, we make teapots and pencil holders after images of the disappeared. Never more vivid to us than now, a space for our longing, still you elude us. We gather remnants, make models, invent stories for you, the future we've made for ourselves, written in your absence. I'm going to read one more new poem, and then I'll close with another poem from A Possible Landscape. So this is called Something About the Self. That journey, collecting pieces, gathering them up. Gust of wind, lap of water, hold me. And after the slog of miles and time, a deep in-breath, knowing itself at last, broken edges and lank stitching, resting in the knowing, only to feel its thinness, an open weave billowing slightly in the wind, to see at once the hard achievement clung to is pervious. Time to let go, slip past the layered accumulations, and balance, if possible, on motion and instability. This porosity, the newer truth, and another moment's poise. To find comfort on what? Thin air? The self I thought to be too small, too definite. And who knows such openness, this exchange, the way trees bend and rise through the leaning air. This is a poem about the fun the poets can have. It's called Crossing the Bar, and it's for Jane Urquhart. Annie Oakley taps her way across the floor, places her hand on the edge of the bar, leaps onto it lightly. The piano player cocks his hat, and the music begins. We raise our bottles high in time, and while we sing, Annie dances from one end of the bar to the other. Outside it's dark, and the water laps at the edge of the sidewalk, and we might have come from anywhere, might have been found stepping out of a boat, docking slowly by a brick embankment. And oh, the sparkle and the splendor of bottles of colored liquors, of glasses before gilt mirrors. Laughing, arms linked in a circle, we sway and sing, heads nearly touching. And where have we been? Where have we been? Where can we go? By music and water. Outside it's dark, and a boat bumps the sidewalk in time to the wash of the music. And we might have come by water, murmuring the names of places we might have seen as we stared into the dark for a landing. Annie crosses the bar in her high-heeled tap shoes, our glasses rattling to their rhythm. And where we might have been we scarcely know, as whispers from the dark rock us. The boat may leave at any moment, the circle widening, and who will remember the sound of water outside the music, what it meant, the scent of the night air. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. That exceeded our expectations. Thank you very much. We're going to take just a minute.
I was wondering if we could really impose and ask our guest to read the poem that you suggested she read to us, because I really, really enjoyed that. That'd be a great imposition. I really liked the poem that you recommended that she read to us. Would you mind?
No, not at all.
Thank you.
I have to do the struggle to find it again since it hasn't got a tab on it.
Not many poets get encores.
No, it's true.
Encore. Oh, we know we don't.
Thanks, Ron. I dance country. It's raining across the whole country, I bet, slicking these heat shield rocks red under a white sky lowering in, and past the windshield wipers slur, the road's edge, flung with wildflowers, gleams like somebody's just spatter painted it, red, yellow, and white. In Manitoba, the wheat's still green, and if you look, you'll see the wind punching up clouds upon clouds over yellow-green waves as rain blows in, streaking the window. Drive, I said. I've got him and the rain on my mind, like in any good country song, imagining we are dancing, pulled into the tavern with the jukebox, or maybe it's Friday night, a three-piece Western band. It's so real I can feel his arm across my back, stronger than I remembered it. And dancing like this is all I ever want to do. Nothing so perfect 30 years down the road as country music and his arms, this riddling mix of memory and desire swinging me home. The highway rises to meet wet cloud along the North Shore. It's late afternoon and the road swoops like any crow in and out of fog, the land looming up, shadowy and blurred, and any story might be happening out there past the rocks and pines, the swamp where moose browse like no one's ever stopped, but only high-tailed past through the rain to the next jukebox and hot cup of coffee, and these wheels turning keep the dream alive. I'm still dancing. It's getting dark now as we drive, and the rain still falls. The road reeks of emptiness. The land is only shadow. It's hard to see anything but the road's sleek skin and rock and trees edging in. There's no tavern round this curve and no jukebox, but the radio's on to hurtin' songs, and I want to look up and see myself glowing in the blurry windshield, looking more beautiful than he ever remembered me. His glance holding me here as we dance, buoyed by the rain and the dark and the road, this country music leading us on.